RX Vega benchmarks have arrived, but are they the AMD GPUs we've really been waiting for? You know, the ones that will finally allow us to praise the glory that is the red acronym? Because it's kind of been a while since AMD has been able to bring the fight for high-end GPU supremacy to NVIDIA. Even with its fantastically priced RX 400 and 500 lineup, AMD couldn't realistically compete with the performance of NVIDIA's 1070, 1080, or even 1080 Ti after that. But all of that is about to change with the official launch of RX Vega. Or is it? Unfortunately, I can't answer that question by drawing on my own personal experiences or by benchmarking the cards that AMD sent me for review, because living in South Africa comes with some drawbacks, including not being able to get my hands on an RX Vega card for at least the foreseeable future. But other reviewers have unveiled their benchmarks for the cards, and the numbers, they can be impressive. But are they impressive enough to boot NVIDIA off of the high-end GPU pedestal, or to satisfy the end consumer? Let's look into that. But before we get to all of the juicy benchmark scores, let's look at what the RX Vega cards will be bringing to the table. Vega will launch in two variations, the RX Vega 64 and Vega 56. Vega 64 is priced at a hefty $699 for the liquid-cooled version and $499 for the air-cooled version, both of which can come with a limited sleek brushed metal reference design. Those prices put the cards right in line to compete with NVIDIA's 1080 and 1080 Ti offerings. Vega 56, however, comes in at a much more attractive price of $399, which puts it squarely in the 1070 ballpark. As for specs, the Vega lineup is no slouch. All of the Vega cards are manufactured under the 14nm process, which is very modern of AMD, have 12.5 billion transistors under the hood, and support 8GB of HBM2 memory, which is not GDDR5 for once. That's optimized using AMD's HBCC, or High Bandwidth Cache Controller. The liquid-cooled variant of Vega 64 comes with a base clock of 1406 MHz, which boots to a pretty impressive 1677 MHz. All of that power, well, requires a lot of power, and the card will draw around 345 watts under load. Not unexpectedly, the air-cooled version of the card boasts significantly reduced performance specs. Even so, the card still rocks a respectable base clock of 1247 MHz that can be pushed to 1546 MHz for ultimate performance. Luckily for those of you now eyeing a 1000 watt power supply at the mention of Vega 64's power thirst, the air-cooled version will have a slightly better but still incredibly ridiculous TDP of 295 watts. Both variants of the 64 are equipped with, wait for it, 64 compute units, hence the name Vega 64. Get it? Now, onto the Vega 64's little brother, the RX Vega 56, which has, right, 56 compute units. Good job, you were paying attention. As the card is priced at about $200 less than Vega's highest end offering, you'd expect its specs to follow suit, and they do. Coming in with a base clock of 1156 MHz and a boost clock of 1471, Vega 56 isn't just a neutered version of its more expensive counterparts. Sure, its VRAM speed does take a fairly significant hit, only coming in at 1600 megatransfers per second, which is almost 300 less than Vega 64, but with a very manageable TDP of only 210 watts. Anyway, now that I've reminded you that yes, RX Vega is a thing that's totally happening, since AMD sure did take their sweet precious time with it, it's now time to see if it actually performs as well as we're all hoping it does. Looking at the benchmark scores already making the rounds online, both Vega 56 and Vega 64 are proving to be more than worthy competition for NVIDIA's GTX 1070 and 1080 respectively, and AMD's earlier offerings like the R9 Fury X, while putting up a pretty good fight, rarely prove a challenge for Vega. Unsurprisingly, the less costly Vega 56 can't really hold its own against the GTX 1080, but it's not really supposed to. The 56's main competition is the GTX 1070, which it either matches in performance or beats out entirely depending on the title being tested. The card looks to be, on average, about 10% faster than the GTX 1070 almost across the board. And its sweet spot sits firmly at 1440p resolution gaming at high to ultra settings. Synthetic benchmarks seem to continue this trend with both the 56 and 1070 averaging out similar scores. As for Vega 64, you might want to take a seat. As its $500 or $700 price point would indicate, Vega 64 is poised to take on the 1080's or 1080 Ti's throne, and depending on who you ask, it's able to at least touch the 1080. The Vega 64 absolutely destroys the 1070 and goes blow for blow against the GTX 1080 at all resolutions. On average, Vega 64 outperforms the 1080 by a noticeable, albeit small margin, and takes the win in more than half of the gaming benchmarks that I've seen. It should be mentioned, however, that in games where the 1080 comes out on top, it does so by a fairly large margin. Although it's hard to say what of that is a performance defeat and what is driver bugginess, since it's still a fresh spawn of a card. The air-cooled version of Vega 64 performs from slightly worse to worse than its liquid-cooled variant, resulting in an average FPS loss of 3 to 10 FPS, which is a little bit or a lot, depending on how you look at it. And then, as for which is the better value offering, Vega 64 or 56, it's kind of hard to tell right now. The difference in performance between the two, in my opinion, doesn't exactly justify the $100 plus premium between the two cards. If AMD truly wants to win the hearts of gamers and enthusiasts alike with Vega, I can't help but think it would have been a heck of a lot easier to do at a cheaper launch price. Another thing to take into account if you're trying to choose between RX Vega and the GTX 1070 and 1080 is power efficiency. In order to level the playing field and even come close to matching Nvidia's offerings in terms of performance, Vega is extremely power hungry, which I guess given AMD's reputation is no surprise, room heaters that they are. The Founders Edition of the GTX 1080 draws about 180 watts from the wall, which could be considered a sip when compared to the Vega 64's 295 watt gulp. And that's just the air-cooled model. All things considered though, it seems Vega isn't exactly the 1070 or 1080 killer we've been waiting so long for, but it does put up more than a good fight and has AMD poised to finally be competitive in the high-end GPU market. Just how competitive they'll be has yet to be seen. And given that cryptocurrency miners haven't allowed Polaris to hit retail shelves as of late, if RX Vega is anything like its younger brothers, us normal pleb consumers might not be able to even touch these cards either, which means that diagnosing how it performs in games will be for naught until things crash and then these markets flood with the second-hand, abused, tortured, and worn-out shells of what an RX Vega GPU used to be. So we have that to look forward to, I suppose. But to sum it all up, to condense RX Vega into one word, it would be most definitely disappointing. We're comparing AMD's hot-off-the-presses cards to GPUs that launched forever ago in hardware years, and it's just barely enough to compete at the same price point. I celebrated their maneuver when they launched the RX 480 because they played the value game and didn't try to go toe-to-toe with the likes of the 1070 and 1080 powerhouses at the time. But now, it's tired and stale to compare a card to their Pascal equivalent. AMD had many moons to come out with something that could be a performance king, or be a value king for that matter, and they've achieved something that's really neither. It feels like the RX Fury launch all over again, or R9 Fury launch that is. AMD's top tier card that provides middling performance at a weird price point and no one is really ever likely to own one. Over a year of hype and waiting on the promises of HBM2 memory, and we get this. I honestly don't see a compelling reason for anyone to jump ship to Team Red with this release. And I kinda honestly feel bad for anyone who might have been holding off on buying a GPU to see what Vega offered, as you picking up a 1070 or 1080 before the mining craze would have been just as good as what you're getting with RX Vega now, and you would have saved a fair bit of electricity costs given the nearly 100 watt disparity between Nvidia and AMD's offerings. But I guess Vega could be a good investment for the coming winter. Anyways, I'm going to wrap the video up there. I'm actually curious to know all of your thoughts on RX Vega. Are you as disappointed as I am? Do you think I shouldn't be so harsh on these cards? How much do you think Nvidia paid me to express disappointment with AMD's GPUs? Let's have that discussion in the comments down below. This wasn't paid for by Nvidia, so chill. Be sure to toss a like on this video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe to stay up to date on all of our tech-related content. I am Brett with the UF Disciple channel. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Cheers. Like Threadripper is actually amazing, which is the, like, I don't even get it. Like, AMD knocked it out of the park with their CPUs, providing really good value, but then the GPUs is just like, what was the 580 launch? What even was that? And then Vega is just like, we had to wait a year and plus some change to get this. It's like, why, what are you doing, AMD? You got the CPU market down. Good job, Lisa Su. Raja Kadori, you got to step up Radeon Technology Group. Like, this is just, do you have something coming out soon, like at the end of the year? Because I kind of would like to see that. I don't want to bash on AMD, but like, geez. Anyways, see you guys in the next video.